Good evening, everybody, holy brothers and sisters, and welcome to Chayei Moharan, Shiur number 18. That's Chayei Moharan. Amazing, look at this, Shiur number 18. Thank you so much for joining. I really hope you are enjoying these series of Shiurim. As a reminder, this series is in the memory of my maternal grandparents, Menachem ben David Tzvi and Alana bas Sarah. May the neshamas have the highest of aliyahs. In this week's shiur, once again, we're going to be going through two lessons from Chayei Moharan, and that's going to be lesson 121 and lesson 120. In Hebrew, it's the letters, it's numbers, Kuf Chaf and Kuf Chaf Aleph. For a little recap from last week, we learned about a 6-month journey that Rabbeinu took. In this journey, he kept himself very hidden. He didn't take any money. And even during this time, unfortunately, his first wife passed away. He shortly remarried. And we followed Rabbi Nachman through a very difficult and also quiet time, because not much is known from this journey that he took. We also learned that Rabbi Nachman had a very powerful dream about crossing a border. And once he had woken up, everything suddenly became clear. And we also had a bit of a lesson and an idea of moving forward even when we don't understand the situation that we find ourselves in, and also the ability to be able to find strength in silence. So, without further ado, let's begin tonight's lesson in Chayei Moharan. If you're looking inside in the sefer, we are on page Kuf Mem Zayin. That's lessons Kuf Chaf and Kuf Chaf Aleph. And if you're looking inside in the BRI version of tzaddik, we are on page 54. Okay. Without further ado, let's begin. Bishnas Tov Kuf Ayin Nasa Lu'uman. In the year 1810, which is approximately, or it was around ER time, Rabbi Nachman traveled to Uman. We're going to learn a little bit later in lesson 185, that's Kuf Pei Hey in Chayei Moharan, about this travel in depth. In other places in the Sefer, we're also going to discuss perhaps why Rabbi Nachman chose to travel to Uman. Uman has really great significance in Breslov. As it's known, Rabbi Nachman is buried in Uman. It's a place where he wanted to be buried. But in addition to that, when living in Breslov, there were these really massive fires that took place right before Rabbi Nachman decided to finally make the move to Uman. And this was part of the catalyst that led him to coming back to the city where he had traveled through years before and had decided that he wanted to be buried in this city. So Bishnas Tov Kuf Ayin Aleph Nistalik Sham, in the year 5571, which was still the English year of 1810. This is where Rabbi Nachman passed away. B'chol hamaisios sheyesh b'chol nesia v'nesia b'chol makom sheyashev sham, and there are many events connected to each and every journey that Rabbi Nachman had along the way, and every place that he dwelled. Ktsasam kvar nirshemu b'makom acher, and some have already been recorded elsewhere. Many of them we've already discussed in this section of Chayei Moharan, which talks about Rabbi Nachman's early life until his passing. Oftentimes, none of them go into great depth. Some of them do go into great depth. And there are other places where some of these stories have been recorded, one of them being Yossi Glogauer, which is the life of Reb Nosson. Obviously, that's Rabbi Nachman's main prized student. Especially this journey, as I mentioned, is discussed a little bit more depth in Chayei Moharan 185. V'rubam nishkach, but most have been forgotten. There's a lot of these stories that were not written down, or they were just heard, and they weren't recorded, and therefore they don't remain, and they're no longer in our collection of stories about Rabbi Nachman's life. Chutz mizeh yesh harbe yoser ma she'ein anu yodim klal. And beyond this, there's much more that we do not know at all. Ki bevadai ein shum adam yodea toichen kavanes nisyasei hakdoshim. For surely no one can know the inner intent of Rabbi Nachman's holy travels. So, as I mentioned, these excerpts are very short from today's class, I'd say. So my plan was to go through lesson 120 and lesson 121, and then to connect it to the time that we're in the Jewish calendar. So if you bear with me while we go through 121, I will do my best to connect what we're learning to the current times that we are facing, not only the Jewish calendar as well, but also, I would say, socially, and also just in terms of news and life, and perhaps where our minds could be at as a whole. So let's go through 121 now. Bishnas Tov Kuf Samach Hey Bein Pesach Latzeres Nasa LeSharigrad. So now we're jumping around, as Reb Nosson often does, and now we're going back. We were in 1810, now we're going to 1805. In the year 5565, 1805, between Pesach and Shavuos, Rabbi Nachman traveled to Sharigrad. V'shah sham shnei Shavuos, and he stayed there for 2 weeks. So what happened there? V'gam nesiyazu haisa pla gedola moed. This journey too was an exceedingly great mystery. And clearly this is why Reb Nosson is touching on this story as well, because the past few paragraphs that we have also been clouded in great mystery, and we don't exactly know the details of what happened on those trips of Rabbi Nachman. So we're sort of on a theme, although we're jumping between years. Va'amar la'anashim oisai, and he said to those who accompanied him, ha'olam misgagayim masai yihya kahabal shem tov zechorna levracha shalu haya habal shem tov zechorna levracha haya gam ke mechapes yoser. Okay. So Rabbi Nachman said to those people who are accompanying him, the world longs for the time when it will be as it was in the times of the Baal Shem Tov. May his memory be a blessing. When the Baal Shem Tov came and revealed his great teachings to the world and revealed himself to the world was also at a very tumultuous stage and highly benefited from the Hasidic movement that the Baal Shem Tov established. And Reb Nosson saying here that had the Baal Shem Tov arrive at his time in 1805, then the world would still be longing to have such a great tzaddik come into the world and be great benefit. Said Reb Nachman something very interesting though, that if the Baal Shem Tov were alive, people would still be searching for more, which is wild, because even at that stage of Rabbi Nachman, with all the Hasidic masters and great teachers and Rabbanim that there were at the time leading the world, people were still searching for more. They were trying to find their place spiritually, which is a very wild thought to hear from Rabbi Nachman himself. Opisam yatsa misham, and suddenly he left from there, meaning Rabbi Nachman left Sharigrad, va'amar shebareach kamoy me'esh, saying that he was leaving as if leaving from fire, that he was escaping. It was super sudden, as if leaving from a terrible tragedy to try to get away from. So why is that? And afterwards, as soon as Rabbi Nachman had left, there actually were great fires there several times. Va'amar, ilu hayu yoidim b'nei Sharigrad hatoiva shasisi lehem v'chulei. Rabbi Nachman said, if the people of Sharigrad only knew the goodness I'd done for them, as if hinting that Rabbi Nachman's presence there was of really great spiritual benefit to the city, that they mamish had no clue what Rabbi Nachman's simple presence was having on the effect of holding up the city from mamish existing. Afal pichein kol zeh toiv me epus rachmana litzlan. Nonetheless, all this is better than rot, chas v'shalom. And this is hinting to that even just the spiritual power of what Rabbi Nachman's presence was doing there. We'll move on midvar of shahatzilam al yedei yeshivasai sham me'ipos rachman al-atsan, and is understood from his words that Rabbi Nachman mamish saved them through his simple presence alone from a form of spiritual rot, chas v'shalom. Then we get to this part where it says, Eila Maseh B'nai Yisrael. These are the journeys of the children of Israel. This is also referring to the holiness of Rabbi Nachman and his travels from one place to another and the spiritual accomplishments that he made in each place. But this is also referring to two teachings of Rabbi Nachman that they can be found in Lchaim Moharan. And these I will reference here so you know exactly which teachings these are referring to. We're not going to see them inside tonight, but obviously it's referring to the in Bamidbar. But if you see Lchaim Moharan Chelik Aleph, that's Siman Mem, that's lesson 40 in the first part of Lchaim Moharan, and in the second part of Lchaim Moharan, that's Siman Samach Beis, that's lesson 62. We're not going to see those inside, but just for reference, this is the teaching that's being referred to here. Asher hazoicha v'yizke leida soid echad min nisiyosav haplais ma'oid. Fortunate is the one who merits to know even one secret of his wondrous ways. Shaloi haya lahem shum tam al pi pashut, which seemed to have no reason on a simple level. Rabbi Nachman's presence, because it was so clouded in mystery, it was very hard to understand or even know 1 ounce of his purpose in many of the places that he went to. Ba'amar be'esh shenasa Navrich, and Rabbi Nachman said when he traveled to the city of Navrich, Elu hayu ha'olam yoidin inyan nisiyasi, if the world understood the meaning of my journey, hayu minashkim ha'pasiya sheli, they would kiss my footsteps. And this really hints to the fact that we mamish don't know a lot of what Rabbi Nachman was accomplishing, but we can only assume that it must have had serious spiritual impact. Oh, I just read that part. Ani machria es kol ha'olam kulei lekafschus. Says Rabbi Nachman, I tip the entire world to the side of the merit with every single footstep that Rabbi Nachman takes. So, that's the end of 121 in Chayei Moharan. So, as we went through the teachings from tonight, I want to do my best to connect these ideas to the time that we're in right now in the Jewish calendar. On Sunday, Emir Hashem, we shouldn't have to fast, and Mashiach should come. But at the time of recording this year, it's Monday, and the 3 weeks, the Shiva Asar B'Tammuz starts on Sunday, which means it's the start of the 3 weeks. And as we know, in Yiddishkeit, the 3 weeks is a very difficult period in our history. So many calamities across our entire existence has happened in a period of these 3 weeks. So not only is the 3 weeks a time of mourning, which Emir Hashem it shouldn't be, but it's also a time that I think we can use to reflect. And this can happen with Mashiach as well. We can reflect on this. And it's a time to think about, I think, what's missing in our world and what role we also play in filling that space. And I'm going to do my best to connect it to tonight's teachings. So one of the most important and most powerful ideas that we learned tonight is that we really don't fully understand the kavanas. We don't fully understand the deeper intentions of a tzaddik, especially when he's traveling or involving himself in very secretive manners from his travels. And we learned here, and we've been learning for the past few weeks about Rabbi Nachman's travels and suddenly leaving places, and especially tonight we hear and learn Rabbi Nachman saying things like, I'm running as if running from a fire. But we don't really know what's going on beneath the surface, and even those closest to him didn't even know. Reb Nosson clearly also didn't know, from the fact that there's parts missing, and from the fact that it even says in tonight's paragraph that we learned, V'rubam nishkach, that most of it was forgotten. Some of it we never even knew at all. And this is mamish what we just learned. And yet, those forgotten steps, they still mattered, because each one, Rabbi Nachman had a very strong impact on all those places that he had been. And I would like to say, perhaps this is especially because Rabbi Nachman's acts and avodas in those places were hidden. And this is where I want to bring up a really beautiful pasuk from Chavakuk. The Navi writes, at the time of Nebuchadnezzar's destruction and invasion of Eretz Yisrael, and at the time where Nebuchadnezzar has captured the Jews and he's bringing them to Bavel, the Navi writes, tzaddik b'emunasa yichya, that the tzaddik lives with emunah. He's always with Hashem, and Hashem's always with him, and wherever the tzaddik goes through the world with a faith-filled vision and a mindset of emunah, that we as regular, well, I would say, if you want to say Beinin, but as regular Yidden, this is something that we can't always see because the tzaddik's level is way higher. And if we can bring an analogy, like a doctor giving bitter medicine, the treatment may not make sense from the outside. We may not even see how the treatment is helping us, but it's healing on a very deep level. So why does this matter now? During the times of the 3 weeks, we're living in a aftermath of loss. The Beis HaMikdash is gone. The open presence of Hashem is hidden. We don't see the Shechina. We can't bring karbanos. Especially if you think about where Bnei Yisrael is at a stage like today, with a rise of anti-Semitism, where post-October 7th, the world as a whole is in a very fragmented place. But I think the message here is that just because something is hidden, it doesn't mean that it's meaningless. I want to say adarabba, that completely on the contrary. Even on our own steps, when we're taking our own steps with intention, that this can carry really deep weight, even if nobody else sees the things that we're doing. And when we're talking in a sense of spiritual growth and connecting to Hashem, most times and very often, those moments of growth happens in a state of solitude. It happens in a state where people are not watching, and happens in a state of, especially hisboidedus, which comes from the word lehisboided, to isolate, as we've mentioned several times in this series, to be alone with just you and Hashem, speaking to Hashem. It just reminded me of a really amazing story from Rabbi Nachman. I'm forgetting who he told this to. I believe it was to his student, Rav Naftali. I can check after the shiur, but it's a story that just came to my head, so it's relevant and I want to share it. Rabbi Nachman once told one of his students that there was a great Rebbe who, when he would daven in an isolated room, and he wouldn't want to be seen. But one day he heard scratching on the door. He heard some noises on the other side of the door, and it sounded like a sound of scratching. So he assumed that one of his students or a couple of his students were standing outside of the room that he liked to daven in, and therefore he, with more intention, with more joy and more enthusiasm, he began to daven with louder intensity. Little did this Rebbe know that actually on the other side was a cat scratching at the door, and therefore the only reason why he picked up his intensity and davened with what seemed like more kavana was only because he was actually davening so that the cat, which he thought was his students, would hear him. So it was just a little anecdote that I wanted to share, which I also felt was relevant because our very powerful moments of growth can happen in a state of solitude. But if we're thinking about what other people are thinking, or if we're acting in a way because we want to be seen in a certain way, or we want to appear as if we behave and those actions aren't actually authentic, then that's actually hindering our own personal growth. That's not helping our spiritual growth. But our spiritual growth, when it can happen in a state of solitude and it's authentic, then we can really rise to very high, beautiful levels. And this is where I have a practical question here that I wanted to share. What if some of our forgotten parts of our own life, those quiet struggles and those unseen efforts, are actually the most impactful? And if you think about that, I'm sure you can come up with some own answers to reflect on your own life and perhaps see where some of those personal journeys have taken place and made you who you are. So this was touching on lesson 120. But if we continue on, I think there's a beautiful connection to lesson 121, also related to the 3 weeks and our own personal growth, and how we can also learn from Rabbi Nachman's ways, even if we don't fully understand or have any details of the trips and the places that Rabbi Nachman went to. So in 121, Rabbi Nachman tells us that he had to leave Sharigrad like fleeing from a fire. And after he left, there were actual fires, but he also says something strange. Sorry, that was 120. So yeah, after leaving Sharigrad, Rabbi Nachman says the following: if they only knew what good I did for them being there. And Rabbi Nachman, while he was there, we're not really clear what he was doing, whether he was giving shiurim or not, or whether he was leading for bringings or not. It's not very clear. But Rabbi Nachman, what we can know for sure, that he was simply present and he was still following his own avodas and really high spiritual service of Hashem. And that alone, from his current presence, seemingly saved a town from where Rabbi Nachman referred to as a state of rot, which could mean physical destruction, spiritual collapse, plagues, or chas v'shalom, worse, who knows. Also fires, so clear destruction. So how can we connect this to where we are right now? Many Breslev Chassidim, in fact, it's a really great minhag in Breslov, that when the 3 weeks begin, we begin learning a lesson in the Chayei Moharan, which is in the second section of the Chayei Moharan, and it's lesson 67, Samach Zayin. So why do we learn it? Because during this time, it's a lesson that Rabbi Nachman taught us, that when a great tzaddik leaves the world, one of the things that increases chas v'shalom from a tzaddik's passing is fires throughout the villages and towns of the whereabouts of where this great tzaddik had lived. There's also some very beautiful connections between the Beis HaMikdash, the beginning and the end of the Torah, and about tefillin. It's mamish a really, really beautiful Torah. It has to be one of my favorite lessons in Lchaim Moharan. If any of you are following my good chaver Ariel Weisberg on Instagram, Sparks of Breslev, he and I, one of the first Torahs we learned together as a chavrusa was lesson 67. So it's got a very special place in my heart, and it's highly impactful. So I highly recommend that in this 3-week period, if Mashiach doesn't arrive, which I'm sure it will, that you can learn this during the 3 weeks, or you can still learn it during the times of Mashiach. So this lesson, it took place while Rabbi Nachman was already, I believe he was already in Uman, but it might have been in Breslov because it could have been a little before. I didn't get a chance to check up on the history, so I'm doing this up at the top of my head. But at the time that Rabbi Nachman learned of Rebbe Levi Yitzchak of Barditchev's passing, it was actually after Shabbos they had learned. And this lesson was actually taught on that Shabbos. So there was no way, except through Ruach HaKodesh, for Rabbi Nachman to know that Rebbe Levi Yitzchak had actually passed away. And yet he taught this really highly deep teaching about the impact that a tzaddik has on the world and what his physical loss from the world has on the world. So a tzaddik is so deeply connected to the spiritual structure of the world that the tzaddik can feel when something shifts. And he lives in tune with this divine current. And the tzaddik's soul can sense this change. And when a tzaddik departs from the world doesn't just lose a leader. It loses mamish, a spiritual anchor from holding things in existence. And sometimes things get unplugged, perhaps if you want to say it in this sort of sense, that it's more metaphoric, that a shield is removed and there's a gap that affects everything. And spiritually, although the tzaddik leaves a lasting impact, I would like to interpret the pasuk that tzaddik be'emunasa yichya, that a tzaddik with his lessons in emunah, the lessons that the tzaddik teaches us with his emunah, and how to have emunah, yichya, he also gives life. And that's why there's this state that the tzaddik, even in his physical passing, has perhaps even more impact than when he's alive. So what does this lesson and idea of Lchaim Moharan 67 and the increase in fires, what does that mean for us, and what does it mean for the tzaddik's removal from a city or the impact that he has in a city that he was holding together, how can we perhaps apply that to our lives? And I would like to say that even if we're not tzaddikim, our own lives still carry very heavy, strong weights. And during the 3 weeks when we're mourning what's missing, we're mourning the karbanos, we're mourning the Beis HaMikdash, we're mourning Hashem's Shechina, which isn't physically present in Yerushalayim, we should also reflect that what kind of presence am I also bringing to the world? What are my acts doing? What mitzvahs can I perhaps increase? And are my steps tipping things towards the light and bringing more mitzvahs into the world, or chas v'shalom the opposite? And how do I respond when something holy is missing from my life or my community? How can I perhaps make a stronger impact to my inner circle? And this is, I think, a great lesson that we can perhaps take from what we learned tonight from Chayei Moharan. And then Chayei Moharan tonight, Rabbi Nachman says, with every step of my journey, I tip the whole world to the side of merit. And I think that's a really powerful, amazing statement. That Rabbi Nachman's physical movement was also part of something very, very spiritual, and that each journey was a form of avodah. He wasn't just going somewhere, going from one place to another, point A to point B. He was changing the entire world as he moved through it and navigated it. So what about us? How can we apply that to our lives? How can we make this practical? This is always something I like to do in Chayei Moharan, because I think every single move that a tzaddik makes, we can learn something from it. And maybe our steps matter way more than we think. And even with the way we move through our day with mindfulness, with integrity, and when we're davening with kavana, that affects the world. Especially when we walk with Torah on our lips, and we're judging everyone favorably, and we're following Rabbi Nachman's teaching of a zamra to judge everyone with respect and look at their nekudas tovas, find the good points in them. And when we see someone on the street who needs a helping hand, we lend it. And we try to emulate the ways of the tzaddik and the teachings of Rabbi Nachman. And when we do that, we affect the world. So to wrap this all up, during the 3 weeks, we often feel like we're in a time of great spiritual absence. And the world is hurting from what's missing, the Beis HaMikdash, Nevuah, clear divine presence. It's hard to see the moving pictures and the puzzle pieces of how Hashem makes the world turn and move, and what the deeper meaning is behind everything. And 6 October 7th, it's felt like really one long mourning period for many of us, I would say all of Klal Yisrael. And what Rabbi Nachman teaches us, though, is that our presence still matters. And even if we don't understand what we're going through, and even if we feel like we're chas v'shalom walking in circles, we need to remember the lesson of Yerida L'tzorach Aliyah, that down is for the purpose of getting to that high. That high, you only have gotten there because of those low moments. And even if no one else notices perhaps the changes that we've made in our own spiritual growth, I want you to remember this. A hidden step can still hold up a world. So let's walk with purpose. Let's bring kavana into our movements. Let's try in our own way to be the kind of people whose quiet presence brings light and mercy into the world. And with that, I would like to wish you all a fantastic week. Thank you for joining Chayei Moharan, Lesson 18, Chai. I will see you all in Mirz Hashem next week. May we not have to fast. May Mashiach come before then. And may we all have a shiur together live in Yerushalayim. Have a fantastic week.